1. And I'm going to admit the weight room in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us. I hope you guys enjoyed your break, and we are so happy that you are here with us for this conversation about co-creating workforce belonging strategies hand in hand with young professionals. My name is Kenya Dunn, and I am so honored to moderate this conversation. I am an equity consultant, and so I have enjoyed this experience, and I can't wait for you guys to learn from our group of panelists today. I just want to remind everyone that we do have live interpretations in ASL today, and also that this session is being recorded, and all participants will have access to this recording for 90 days post the conference. So before we get started with this conversation around co-creating the workforce belonging strategies with our young professionals, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a background and to share some context about how this conversation actually came to be. So earlier this year, 6 communities were funded by America's Promise Alliance to bring local employers together with young people of color to co-create strategies for more inclusive workplaces where everyone feels like they belong. This project came about because of recognition that young people, particularly young people of color, are often left out of these conversations or aren't given a seat at the decision-making table as companies and organizations are coming up with their DE&I plans. So over the past several months, community organizations like Crystal's at the Tri-County Cradle to Career Collaborative have been working to facilitate the co-creation process between employers and young professionals or young adults. And each of the young adults working on the project were paid as consultants and were able to share their own on their perspectives and experiences about what it means to belong in the workplace as a young person of color. They've been working hand in hand with employers in their community to co-design a new workplace strategy to improve diversity, inclusion, or belonging. And we have some of those people here today who've been involved in the project to share their experience. So just wanted to give you guys a little bit of context, and also the process that has been undertaken is actually called Action Roundtable Conversation. So just in case you hear that term during the discussion today. So I want to start out so that you guys can get to know the panelists. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. And I am going to start out, David, I see you at my top left. So why don't you introduce yourself to the group today?
Thanks, Kenya, and good afternoon, and thank you to America's Promise for orchestrating today's learning forum. As Kenya said, my name is David Bubis. I have the honor of serving as the Senior Director of the UPMC Center for Engagement and Inclusion. The Center for Engagement and Inclusion is responsible for setting the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy for our organization. UPMC is a large healthcare provider located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, though our outreach is much beyond the Pittsburgh footprint. We consist of over 40 hospitals, 800 doctor's office and outpatient centers, and an insurance services arm, as well as managing healthcare in 4 other countries. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. If I wasn't working at UPMC like I do, I typically spend my free time teaching human resources at the Graduate School of Public Health. Lastly, I'll share I'm a white male in my 30s. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I am participating today in my office on the 56th floor of the U.S. Steel Building in downtown Pittsburgh.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you, David. 56 floors, sir, I am afraid of heights. So that did something to me. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Crystal, you're next.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. And I would also like to thank America's Promise Alliance for this opportunity. My name is Crystal Rouse, of course. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I am a Black woman, wife, and mother, knocking on 40 years old, although I don't look it. Thank you so much. I go by the pronouns she, her, and hers. I currently serve as the director of Collective Action Networks for Tri-County Cradle to Career, which is also known by TCCC, so you may hear me reference that later. TCCC serves Charleston, Berkeley, and Dorchester counties here in South Carolina. It's a nonprofit organization committed to closing the academic achievement gap for all children in the Tri-County region from cradle to career. And we have a heavy emphasis on those who are impacted the most, which are our Black and Brown children and those living in poverty. We focus in a unique way to make sure that we are stressing and focusing on systems change. I'd also like to share, like David, who wears many hats. I'm also currently a doctoral student at the University of South Carolina, Columbia, where I am working on a doctorate in teaching and learning with the emphasis on culturally relevant curriculum and sustainable learning. So that's me. I will pass it back to you, Kenya.
Thank you, Crystal. Great to see you. All right. Vincent.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vincent Fox. I am an artist, student, teacher, audio engineer, and I want to thank America's Promise and the Pittsburgh Promise for giving me this opportunity. I've been a Pittsburgh Promise executive scholar for the past 2 years, and I'm really grateful to be a part of the project and to be a part of this conversation right now. I am in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in my apartment. I'll pass it back to you, Kenya.
Thank you, Vincent. And last but not least, Mr. Elijah.
Yes, hello, and good afternoon. Thank you to America's Promise. Also, thank you to the Yes Project. My name is Elijah Lewis, he, him, his. I'm holding it down at Kalamazoo, Michigan, at Western Michigan University, on the first floor. We didn't have enough money for the budget, 56, but they gave me the first floor, in which we are grateful, yes, God. So we are holding it down, first floor, Western Michigan University, and I'm so honored to be here. I am a student here at Western, as I said before, going to school for secondary education with an emphasis on English, political science, and communication. The reason why I joined this team is because you can't complain about anything and not join the conversation, right? Be part of the solution if you have so many issues with something. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity that I had when I got the email and I was recommended to sit down and talk to bigger businesses and corporation on how to be more equitable. I also sit on the board of equity and inclusion here on campus. I've been on the board for equity and inclusion for now 3 years. So I've been doing a little groundwork. So now this is where we're getting into the serious stuff. So I'm just grateful that I was asked to have a seat at the table.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the introduction, Elijah. Thank you to all of you for your introductions. So we are going to get in. I have a few questions that I'm going to ask our panelists, but I want to send out an invitation to all of you who are with us today to engage, right? I'm sure you've done enough virtual conferences and conversations now over the last 24 months or so. And listen, you get out of these things what you put into it. And so I am inviting you, I am encouraging you to please use the chat. If there's a question that you have for any panelists, if there's a particular panelist that you'd like to ask a question to, just put their name in the chat, and I am watching the chat and I will do my best to ensure that your question gets asked before we wrap up our time together. So let's get started. And I want to start off with you, David. As an employer partner in this work, I'd love to hear what the process of co-creation was like from your perspective. What were some of the problems or challenges with inclusion and belonging that you were trying to address? And how did this process help you to address those challenges?
Kenya, thank you so much for the question. And again, all credit and kudos to America's Promise for thinking through how we could meaningfully put intentional efforts in place with young professionals, employers, to make our regions and our communities a better place. I also first want to thank and acknowledge the Pittsburgh Promise, which is the local community organization that has done a superb job of helping raise this conversation within our region and matching employers like UPMC with great talented individuals like Vincent, who we've heard from a little bit already today, to help us create the best workplace for today as well as for tomorrow. When we think about diversity and inclusion within our workplace, and from an employer perspective, I have to share what we know. We know that we are better problem solvers, critical thinkers, and we're more flexible when we have a diverse and inclusive workplace. We also recognize, and I think we could probably all agree, there's been nothing like the past 18 months. When you add the global pandemic of COVID-19, you add the discussions within our community related to race and social injustice, and you add the challenging times all employers can relate to regarding employee recruitment as well as retention. It truly is a gift to have the perspective and open dialogue with young professionals to think about how we meet those needs for today and for tomorrow. The workforce planning conversation is incredibly important. As an employer, I wish I had a crystal ball that would tell me the future, that tell me that there was going to be a global pandemic, that there would be a talent shortage, but I don't have that. But what I do have is the ability to gain insight and perspective from great individuals to help really craft a strategy to be a better place, because we need everyone. You know, so very often when we were having our conversations, we would talk about barriers to an inclusive and diverse workforce. And what we found through a lot of these meaningful conversations is barriers only exist if we allow them. And that's a collective we, meaning this is an all of us problem to solve. And so when we really started to get into some intentional efforts and the great insight that we gained from many individuals like Vincent to help us think about what we could do better, we thought about some of the feedback that was shared, feedback about how individuals can really be struggling, the importance of giving individuals hope and an opportunity to see a path forward. As part of those conversations, one of the recommendations that were given to us at UPMC that we are currently building out and thinking through is how we at the earlier age engage individuals in our community with the great opportunities we have, for me, within the healthcare industry. But as I say in the healthcare industry, yes, if you're interested in being a doctor or a nurse, we need you and we need you now. So I hope you choose us. But I also recognize, and I'm a product of this. I've been working for UPMC for 16 years. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. I'm a diversity and inclusion practitioner, human resource practitioner. And so there are many career paths within the field. And so one of the things that we got out of this feedback and how we can really start building our efforts is how we can go into high school and perhaps even middle schools to raise awareness and connection to the different career paths that are available. Part of that is giving people the opportunity to see endless possibilities. And then we as employer, working with our schools, community partners, and educational institutions to offer wraparound services. We all agreed that doing a one and done presentation for 20 minutes, though there's a lot of energy that can be within those 20 minutes, isn't enough. And so we're really taking that thoughtful approach through the feedback that we've learned on how we can really embed career readiness and opportunities into our middle school and high school curriculum. Thanks, Kenya.
Thank you so much, David. And I had to raise up a couple of things. One, I put it in the chat. where you said barriers only exist if we allow it. And I couldn't agree more with you that that is so true, that we all have to lean into the work together in order to remove those barriers. And I have to say that as a first generation professional success college grad myself, it was my ability to see options, career pathing that I couldn't get from my community, or even frankly from my the house that I was living in. So when you talked about what you all are doing to connect with middle school and high schools to really give those kids a hope and opportunities and endless possibilities, I think that is spot on, because I would have never known what was out there had I not been given that opportunity as a first generation. So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to invite you guys to post any of your questions that you may have in the chat. If you don't have a question right now, but you think of something along the way that you want to ask David, please feel free to post it in the chat and I will come back to it. And until then, I'm going to move on to Vincent and Elijah, because you both served as the young professional consultants on the project. Vincent in Pittsburgh and Elijah with 3 other employers in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We'll start out with you, Vincent. Can you share something you feel you learned from participating in this project?
Yeah, something I learned from participating in the project is that it takes the voice of the youth and the power of those who have it to create change that lasts. And that really has to do with, like David said, recruitment and retention. And something I feel like I contributed to the conversation was my perspective as a young Black immigrant, young professional, and my experiences going through like my last few years being more of an adult and needing a job and not having like whatever I needed to work, but having opportunities like apprenticeships and internships to carry me through, help me learn, and like give me the opportunity to make some money as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Vincent. So Elijah, what about you? Same questions. What did you learn from participating in this project? And tell us about something that you contributed or even taught the employers.
Thank you, Kenya. So what I learned is pretty much what everyone else is saying, David and Vincent, is it takes a village. I've had the privilege to sit at the table and listen to how our roads are so different. They all led to the table. And I think that's wonderful. That's a wonderful thing to be a part of. Not to do my own horn, I'm one of those people who can have a conversation, have difficult conversations, and respect other people's opinions when they differ from me. And I think that that's hard for a lot of people to do, because then you like pass judgment on, well, that's their character. You know, it's kind of like a bashing test against them. But it's not like that at all. So I really learned what everyone else's experiences were that brought them to the table. And I feel like I added my personal experience. I'm an African-American male extrovert who at times can be, you know, very chatty, very excited, but at other times I'm just here to work. I just want the work done. But that doesn't mean it's a negative, right? The lane that I took was more of a like all of us, is how do we want to be treated, right? Or in certain circumstances, like African Americans may take things different than other cultures. So I really took the direction of how do you approach different scenarios, or problem solving skills, or how would you react in certain situations, because culturally and then just individually we all respond differently. So I really just took the direction of treat others the way I would want to be treated, but at the same time being able to adapt to different people around you and be able to have enough relationship or knowledge from a person to know that you may have to be a little creative to satisfy their needs.
Thank you so much, Elijah. So I have to I want to underscore something that you brought up really, which was around in essence, the sense of belonging. And so when we talk about a sense of belonging, we're talking about creating environments where you can be all of who you are, right? So as Vincent has shared, he's an immigrant, a Black male immigrant, you an African-American male. I love your call out of being an extrovert who sometimes want to share your extroversion and sometimes you just want to get your work done. You are my people. I get that. And I see in the chat, by the way, that others are loving your enthusiasm.
Oh, that's right. Whoop, whoop, extrovert. Whoop, whoop.
So this, the question is, for me, the sense of belonging, and either you or Vincent, feel free to answer, for creating a sense of belonging in the workplace for you as a young adult. Can you talk a little bit about what's important just from your own perspective? What type of environment is needed for you to feel like you can, not only that you're welcomed, but that you can be successful and highly successful?
Absolutely. So even in the leadership positions that I've been in, everyone has the same standard, right? This is where I want everybody to be eventually, regardless of where you are. This is a standard. How do we get to that standard? That's be based on the individual, right? Where I'm coming from is you can't treat everybody the same because everyone is different. But at the same time, that standard does not change. But how we're going to communicate, how we're going to work together, how we are going to collaborate, that may change throughout the process, but my standards are still held high. The part that I was coming from is how can I be my full self without feeling like I have to be this corporate America. Oh, we don't talk about that at work. I can't laugh too much because otherwise I'm distracting everyone, or I can't laugh or enjoy work because I'm not taking work seriously. How can I be my full extroverted self? And I particularly put extroverted self because there are some introverts like my mom, we're going to call her my mom, who people love her. She comes to work, she works, she leaves, they love that. I love to get to know people. Now, again, I don't tell about the dog, the cat, the mouse, and what I ate this morning. I don't tell all that information, but I'm a very, for the most part, joyous person when I get to work. How can we implement that into the workforce where we're still building that sense of community, that sense of belonging, that sense of I am a part of that team, without dealing with people who may not necessarily have that same kind of energy, but you are shunned for it. You are almost punished for it. You're not looked down on it. So again, for me personally, it was all about generally speaking, how do we want to be treated in the workforce? What are ways that you can go about solving issues without being problematic, being called disrespectful, or when you explain yourself? This was one of the biggest things, and then I'll turn it over to this. One of the biggest things is being able to speak freely without being told, okay, you're being aggressive, right? I'm a very passionate person. Everyone can agree that I'm a passionate person. So if you know that I'm a passionate person, don't use, when we're having a serious conversation, don't use that weapon against me and say that, okay, now you're being aggressive, not assertive, you're being disrespectful, not passionate. So definitely choosing our words, picking our words. What does that mean? What does that look like? What does that sound like? I always say that often. What does it look like? What does it sound like? Let's put a face to those words. Let's put actions behind those words so we can really get down to what the issue is so we can all meet that standard.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I actually have a different question for Vincent, if Vincent doesn't mind, because I want to just draw a differentiation in what you're talking about, because a sense of belonging means different things in context to the work environment. And what you just described is the sense of belonging of who you are culturally, personality-wise, how you bring all of that to the table. But Vincent, you talked about being an immigrant, right? And for kind of first generation going through that process. And sometimes, and I'm going to use the word that actually David used in the beginning, which was barriers. Sometimes it's just because we don't have access or we don't know how to get the access that can keep us from feeling like we belong. And so I want to ask you, Vincent, to talk a little bit about how did you help the employers understand that journey of someone who, I mean, you so happen to be an immigrant, but when you don't have the available resources or access to the available resources that you need, like what was your recommendation to help employers solve for that?
So my recommendation was apprenticeships and internships, because those are like those, especially for high schoolers, middle schoolers, those are jobs like that you're learning, and it's a school thing, but most of the time there's also like a stipend or a reward. It might be like whether it's writing, whether it's like a company like UPMC who does like a summer program, and then they have that stipend for the participants. Like that was my segue into earning when I had no other way to earn.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Vincent. And that's such a great call out. David, I got a question in the chat for you, so I'm coming to you next. But that's such a great call out, because one of the things, so I also work alongside the team at Tri-County Cradle to Career Collaborative, or TCCC. And the idea of what draws me to that work is the idea of not just addressing a particular problem with a person, but looking at the whole person. That may be a barrier for them. And what you just talked about, Vincent, is not only organizations offering the apprenticeship itself that gives you exposure, that gives you options, that kind of tells you what's out there, but also by providing some type of stipend or financial reward and payout also helps you to start to earn and start to learn how to manage money. So there are so many what I call residual benefits or unintended consequences and positive that can come from things like that. So thank you so much for sharing that. David, so this question is in the chat and it says, David, what is UPMC doing in the HC sector for immigrant workers who have even less access to jobs in HC because of credentialing requirements in the field? Do you know what HC means?
Yeah, talking about the healthcare field. So thank you for the question. Thank you, Kenya, for the opportunity to contribute to this one. And so, one of the areas that I'm particularly passionate about is workforce development. I have a team that I have the responsibility and privilege of working with that really helps to lead and shepherd this strategy for the organization. In the interest of time, I want to be very specific and talk about an approach. And one of the things that we found at UPMC is we have a lot of great community organizations who are experts in what they do. And we have a lot of great schools and educational institutions that have a great expertise in what they do. So rather than us always creating our own program, how can we best partner with these organizations to really have a more connected wraparound service? So this question implies barriers to employment. And for example, one of the components of this question is, if English isn't the primary language. So we work with great community partners who provide free courses for individuals to obtain credentialing as well as proficiency in language. And so then as those individuals are getting a series of support and programmatic efforts through these community partners, we then as UPMC come to those organizations and embed ourselves into those courses, where then we start the conversation about employment opportunities at UPMC, recognizing that there are a lot of opportunities, but how can we help focus on ones that are of interest to the constituents that we serve? And from that, we then walk through the process. So sometimes one of the barriers can be technology. So when thinking about individuals who might be coming to this country in many different situations, perhaps technology is one of the barriers. So one way that we also then embed ourselves into these courses that our programmatic organizations, community partners facilitate is then also sometimes bringing the technology, providing that wraparound service through the completion of the application. We also provide individual coaching. So let's say an individual is going through the employment process, and we all have had this experience where not every job that we've applied for or we're interviewed for, we receive that offer. We then can do coaching debrief sessions with that individual or with the community partner to help talk through why that wasn't the right opportunity, but also to share what other opportunities could be. So we really take a long-term partnership approach to helping to not only focus on the recruitment, but then also the retention. So one of the things that we measure in workforce development, which is unlike the competitive recruitment process, is not time to fill, but success of the hire.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. I appreciate that. Hey, this is a very interesting conversation, and I hope you guys are getting as much from this as I am as the facilitator. So thank you so much to David and Vincent and Elijah for sharing that perspective of what actually was happening in the dynamics of the Action Roundtable conversation. But I definitely, before we run out of time, I want to bring Crystal into this conversation. And so Crystal is from the community of Charleston, right here where I am as well. And she served as the co-coordinator and co-facilitator of this project locally. And so working with 3 employers and several young adult consultants as well. So Crystal, my question for you is, what are your biggest takeaways as from the co-creation experience? And what would be your top 1 or 2 pieces of advice that you share with other communities who might want to replicate something similar?
Okay, thank you so much for the question, Kenya. First, before I answer that, I do have to give a huge shout out to Tri-County Cradle to Careers Office and Administrative Manager, Mary Butts. She served as our primary coordinator and held it down as it pertained to coordination of everything for this project. And it would also be remiss of me, Sister Kenya, not to humbly share my appreciation for you for serving as one of our facilitators or our primary facilitators around conversations between our young people and employers in the areas of equity and inclusion and diversity. I also need to share that with this project, Tri-County Cradle to Career partnered with the Charleston Metro Chamber of Commerce, and they were a partner with us in this work. As far as the takeaways, now to the question. So as far as a few of the biggest takeaways for me, although I consider myself a young professional, I'm not as young as the professionals we worked with, right? So as far as these young professionals, with them, they often don't get a seat at the table, especially when it comes to young professionals of color. These young professionals, if it weren't for them sharing their experiences, sharing their thoughts, our project would not be as successful as it's actually going right now. Our young professionals became very comfortable with sharing. They were confident, they're smart. They provided us a lot of insight on different things that we didn't, were probably, for us, it was hindsight is 2020, right? We weren't even thinking about. So as far as pieces of advice for communities who would like to engage in these conversations, take some time to get to know your young people. So what we did prior to us having, not our young people, our young professionals, prior to having our young professionals join in conversation with the employers, we had conversation with them so that they can get to know each other, that they can see each other's faces and build a level of trust amongst them and us so that they would feel comfortable actually sharing everything that they were thinking and feeling. Because oftentimes, as I mentioned before, because they don't often have a seat at the table, oftentimes when they are presented that seat, they don't feel comfortable sharing exactly what they've experienced or would like to experience. I also learned that young professionals do very well when they are encouraged. Oftentimes during the chats or the conversations that we were having, I intentionally stayed muted because I did not want to veer the conversation or rephrase something that a young person said because I wanted them to have the freedom and liberty to express exactly how they were feeling. However, via the chat, I would send individual messages saying, you guys are doing a great job. Share your thoughts. Don't be afraid to share this, which you shared with us, you know, during our individual conversations. I think another piece that I would like to mention is trying to make sure that there is a time where you are intentionally setting up some form of agreements or norms, common definitions around critical terms such as race, racism, anti-racism, belonging, equity, diversity, and inclusion, because all of them are very relative, but they are all not one and the same. And then also, I want to say one takeaway, which I wish we had had more time to do within the project, which I know we will have some form of inclusion in next time, is trying to incorporate an actual race and equity training for all of the participants, both the young professionals as well as the employers, so that there can be some semblance of understanding of those spaces. Because a lot of times employers have never, we have diversity, equity, and inclusion divisions, right? But not everyone within those divisions or departments or throughout different entities have had the opportunity to participate in those types of spaces and learn from those particular training spaces. So that's what I had as far as key takeaways and pieces of advice.
Thank you so much, Crystal. And of course, because I was right there with you on this journey. And we have a few more minutes. So one, I just want to invite everybody before we wrap up, if you have a question for anyone on the panel, we probably have time for one more question. Thank you all also for just the amazing dialogue that's happening in chat. You know, this creating that community virtually, chat is so important. But I do want to underscore what Crystal said about setting the tone with the young professionals, specifically young professionals of color, because a lot of them are first generation or second generation, and to speak up is not always the natural norm. So I think that pre-work of connecting with them and making sure they were comfortable with common language and terms and getting to know each other really encouraged them to open up and to really lean in. And then also we were intentional about the transfer of power, making sure that it was very clear that the young professionals shared power in this process with employers. And it wasn't like the young professionals were there at the service of, but they were there in service with for the purpose of the project. So that's what I will add to that. So Crystal, will you, when you think about young professional selection, is there anything that you would add as advice for anyone that may be thinking about how do they go about finding young professionals?
Yeah, so we intentionally, of course, we reached out to individuals within our networks first, because with Tri-County Cradle to Career Collaborative, we have, you know, we're very connected with the 3 counties that we serve. So we reached out to them first to check in about some of the young professionals that they may have or that they may know. But however, as we received information back, we were very strategic with how our group was shaped. We wanted to make sure we had individuals, not just African-American individuals. We also wanted individuals of that were, you know, of Latino or Latina descent. We wanted to make sure that we had a range of ages between 18 to 24. We also made sure to try to even out the male versus female dynamic, right? Or however the group identified. We also wanted to make sure that we had diversity in the actual profession that the young professionals were a part of. So some of them may just be out of high school going to college. Some of them may actually be working in an actual professional atmosphere. Some of them may be transitioning from one, you know, profession to the next. So we wanted to make sure to have that different dynamic.
Thank you. Yes, variety is so good. I see we are like almost at time. Crystal, thank you for that insight and thank you for sharing. I do want to say thank you again to America's Promise for putting on this amazing project, but thank you to each of the panelists who came to share your stories and experience today. I think that it was valuable for this community to hear, and hopefully we'll see more action roundtable conversations where we are engaging young people, young professionals of color in the decision-making process inside organizations, because they are the future of the workforce. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. We are at time. Again, this session will be recorded and you will have an opportunity to review it for the next 90 days. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a good day and take care.